All right, here you go. So, welcome everyone. We are live here with Dr. Klaybor. It's a great honor for me to finally have him here on our channel and share his wealth of knowledge and expertise and experience with all of you. So, thank you for joining us and welcome. Welcome to Dr. Klaybor.
Thank you very much, Avi. I'm delighted to be here.
So, I think a good place to start is it okay if I call you Mike?
Oh, please, please, please.
I think it's a good place to start, Mike, by wondering about how people can anticipate or predict that they might suffer from anxiety when taking the GMAT, both if they've suffered from anxiety in the past, but more importantly, if they've never had any test anxiety of any kind in the past, what are some signs that they can look out for that might be a warning sign that they're going to experience anxiety on this particular test?
Well, so it's a very good question. And really, what you'll discover is that you start getting easily distracted. You get distracted by time. What do I do? Am I a perfectionist? Why am I having trouble? I don't understand this. And self-doubt starts to ramp up. And so really looking at how well you manage the actual practice test is crucial. And then when you take the actual test, what I do on my assessment, first and foremost, is what happened to you that changed your score? Well, how did you feel? What did you learn? What were your physiological reactions that were happening so that you can see kind of where you went astray? 20% of people have this problem of performance anxiety. I work with performance anxiety for musicians, athletes, public speaking, all arenas. People start to feel pressure that is actually self-imposed. And that's an essential part of this, Avi, is that what pressures are you putting on yourself for what reasons? And most of the time, what I see is it's a make it or break it for their life. They put so much pressure on themselves that they defeat themselves. They sabotage and they can't focus. Go ahead.
Can you speak a bit to the physiological symptoms that you mentioned earlier? What are some of those symptoms we should look out for?
So the physiology will be like you would have sweating, your shortness of breath. You might feel nervous or anxious or something in your chest, even shaky, and inability to focus so that your mind just wanders, so that what's happening is cortisol is taking over, adrenaline is taking over. So you're getting hijacked by your brain chemistry. The brakes for the hijack really is your prefrontal cortex, your thinking brain. So really, in essence, kind of, if you wanted a quick preview of what I think is essential is, I call it the 3 C's. C1 is competence. If you've done work with Avi and you work with, prep courses and you do your study and you create your strategy, you have your baseline and foundation of competence that you know what to expect in the test and how to proceed. 2, physiological calm, the ability to calm yourself in advance or in the moment, so that there are tools and techniques to get your physiology down, whether it be your breath, blood pressure, heart rate, things of that nature. And then the 3rd C is confidence. There really isn't anything I can think of of people I see in my practice that confidence doesn't help them. If they can find and tap into that, then they're able to really move more freely. They're going to be able to be more present and mindful into what's going on.
I often see a significant difference between competence and confidence with my students. I see that their competence is great, but they don't see it. I see it. They don't see it. They don't realize that they're competent, and so they have the competence, but because they lack the confidence, meaning they don't see their competence, then they underperform. And to add to the physiological symptoms that you mentioned to look out for during practice tests, I would say also after the practice test, if you're looking at questions that you got wrong and you're thinking for some of those, oh, this was an easy question, I can solve it very easily now. I wonder why I couldn't during the practice test.
Right.
Well, that's another thing to look out for because there's really no reason other than anxiety
Exactly.
that would prevent you from solving that question in the practice test. So I think those are good ways to know, hey, test anxiety is something that I need to be thinking about, to be aware of, to prepare for, even if I've never experienced it in the past. And I'll share here with all of the viewers that when I first took the GMAT, that was the first time ever that I experienced any kind of test anxiety. I'd never experienced it beforehand, but there's something about this test. Maybe we should talk about that next. Like, what is it about the GMAT that makes it different from other tests that can bring on this anxiety? And I think, Mike, you said you'd want me to address that. So I'll just keep talking and go ahead about what is it about the GMAT that does that.
Right.
So it's the only test I know of in which the questions themselves are adaptive. Now, some of you are thinking, wait, the GRE is also a computer adaptive test. And that's true, but in the GRE, it's not adapting from question to question, it's adapting from section to section. And that makes a big difference. When the test is adapting to your performance from question to the next question to the next question to the next question, and when you're not used to that, right, if it's the first time ever that you're doing a test like that, there are a lot of weird things that happen to us psychologically, right? In an adaptive test like the GMAT, the hope should be that you get questions that are too hard for you. What
Right.
other test have we ever taken in our lives where that was the hope going into it? Any other test, you're thinking if I go in there and I get a question that's too hard for me, that means that I didn't study hard enough and or I'm not smart enough, right? And it means that I failed. I shouldn't have questions that are too hard for me if I'm doing well. The GMAT, it's the opposite. It flips on its head. Now, getting questions that are too hard for me are actually a sign that I'm doing well. So we have to really wrap our heads around that before we go in there. And then on the flip side of that, if you get an easy question later on in the GMAT, not in the first few questions, but halfway or later than that, you get an easy question. Well, now you're thinking, what does this mean? Why is the GMAT giving me an easy question? I must be failing. I must have gotten all those previous questions wrong. So it really messes with your head. And as an extra complication there's experimental questions which don't have a difficulty level assigned to them yet. That's why they're experimental. So their difficulty level is completely random. So it's very likely that you'll get an easy question late in the test. And most likely it's not one of the actual questions that matter. It's an experimental question, but you see it, you're thinking I must be failing. So now instead of focusing on the question in front of you on the screen, your mind is wandering to why am I not doing well? What am I going to tell my friends tonight when they ask me how I did? Should I forget about business school? I'm not cut out for it. Like all these random negative
Right.
thoughts that are not useful to your performance.
And I would say that overview of what you described, number one, I hear all the time that is 100% accurate. And two, the category, I would say that's all overthinking. And it's how do you stay present and calm question by question? I think about golfers, right? What if you make a bad shot? Do they spend their whole time thinking, I'm terrible, this is horrible, this, my game's ruined, my life is ruined, I should quit golf? No. They clear their mind, they get to the next shot, and they say, how do I make this work for me and fix the problem if there is one? So overthinking is a problem in the inability to really stay present so that you are actually comprehending each question. If you carry that anxiety, all that overthinking you just described into the next question, you're not even reading and comprehending the next question. In fact, I find that one of my major kind of goals to people is like, you don't go into the GMAT thinking, I need X score. You need to go into the GMAT thinking, I'm going to do my best. I'm prepared. I know what I'm doing, and I've proven it on my practice tests. I need to relax, trust myself, and be calm. And believe it or not, I even say, look, you probably have never been more tuned up intellectually than you are when you do the GMAT. Why not have more fun with this? Do you think a wide receiver goes into a football game saying, I have to score 3 touchdowns or I'm a failure and I should? No, they don't do that. They work hard, they prepare, they mentally rehearse to do their best, and then they go play. Maybe they score, they don't. But the weights that GMAT students put on themselves about, I have to get into this school, a top tier school, and I have to, this score will work against you. You have to work with yourself to say, if I trust myself, do my best, remain calm and confident, listen to my tutor, follow the strategy of skip questions and not be a perfectionist. I've seen so many, like, they won't let go of a question.
Mhm.
They're in 3 minutes, they're 4 minutes. Say, no, what? You're torturing yourself. Then now you start looking at the time. Now you get behind. Now you've ramped up your heart rate, your fear, your breathing has changed. And now you've lost yourself, and it takes time to recover. So the idea is to try to keep centered and focused with some of these techniques. I teach 6 techniques basically, and I can tell you more about that too.
You mentioned mental rehearsal. I'm guessing maybe that's one of the 6.
Is one. Let me mention the 6 as just a baseline, so you see a foundation. First is what's called a thought log. I collect the most common automatic negative thoughts in a row, about 7. The feelings that those thoughts generate. Then teach a reframe to those thoughts, to how to do your self-talk and inner dialogue to change the feeling. And here's a good way to visualize it, a triangle in your mind. If you go in with these negative thoughts, I haven't studied enough, I'm not prepared, I should do better, this is really hard, what time, actually I saw someone last week that was taking the GRE and the fire alarm went off like 10 minutes, but came back. I said, what did you do? I use my techniques to center myself calm. So 1, thought log. Negative thoughts create negative emotions and impact your behavior. We teach to get the thought positive, to change the emotion positive, to change the outcome. So that's 1, thought log, reframing. 2, teaching how to do proper breathing. There are 3 things that happen with breath that, if you notice when you get anxious, happens autonomically, automatically. 1, hold your breath. You get really anxious, stressed, your heart start to hold your breath. That activates cortisol, automatic nervous system for anxiety. 2, short, shallow, rapid breathing causes panic attack. Many people will actually have a panic attack if their breathing changes. 3, they say, take a long, deep lung breath. That activates you too. So I teach a technique that slows the breath, paces it, brings everything down. 3, muscle relaxation. We do a scan and a practice to teach all the muscles to relax and scan where the tension is to release it so you get it out of your body. 4th technique is, I call it the magic eraser. How to clear your mind, wipe away thought. In fact, if you want to, I think I could even demonstrate that today.
Please.
5 is what I call best moment. I capture these are very personalized, individualized techniques that, by the way, I make a recording of and send to everybody after they're done so that they can listen and reprogram themselves. Well, best moment is think about a time and place you are calm, confident, happy, relaxed. We get a visualization of it. I create a script, record it, and then send it out. And then 6 is rehearsal, preparing. You go to the site in advance. You know where to park, what time you're going to get up, what snacks you take. And we create that entire script, record that so that we go from thoughts to breath, physiology, and then putting you in a zone with good feelings so that you can center yourself. That's an overview.
It's so important and I think underestimated by a lot of people, undervalued. There's a question in the chat here from someone who has hyperhidrosis, which is a condition in which the palms sweat excessively, and that apparently can cause an issue with the yellow laminated sheets that you have to use
Right.
at the test center. I'm guessing that the 6 techniques that you just mentioned would be your recommendation to handle that. Is there anything in particular that you would add for this particular condition?
I think that's a little tougher one because it's pretty extreme severe. Someone in 20 to 30 seconds can soak their shirt with sweat or hands. So probably that person would need some biofeedback, hypnosis, meditation to help keep them calm, in addition to the 6. But that is it's not common, but it is really problematic. That's a tough one.
Thank you. I think that maybe just off the top of my head, writing downwards, in other words, vertically instead of horizontally, right? Because when you're writing horizontally, the palm might scrub what
Moses
you just
sweat.
wrote.
Mhm.
But if you write vertically, then it's not as bad. So just a thought to try.
Yeah, yeah.
We have another question here about using time tags or timestamps. So that's the strategy taught by a lot of test prep companies where every 4 questions or every 8 questions, whatever the technique is, you check how much time is left in the timer. And then I guess the idea, also based on this chat message question, is that if you see that you're behind where you should be, then you start guessing more aggressively, right? Or start
Right.
letting go of questions more than you would prior to that.
Mhm.
So I know how I feel about it. Do you want to address it first, Mike, before I kind of give my 2 cents?
Yeah, what I've seen, and that does come up a lot, people watching the timer, and that just takes them away from the test. And I think I would recommend against time tag. I would focus on just being present and not worrying about time, not thinking about time, and pull yourself back to each question like as quickly as possible. But I know you have some good
Yeah,
thoughts.
so I completely agree with Mike on this point, and I'll just add a few pointers here. Okay, so number one, that's what practice tests are for. The practice tests are there so that I can be confident that I won't run out of time. Now, how do I not run out of time on practice tests? The key is to not attempt to solve questions that are not going well. Okay? And if we're really honest with ourselves, every one of us knows whether the question that I'm working on right now is going well or not going well. Everybody knows. It might take a minute or even 2 minutes to figure that out, to know that it's not going well, but it won't take more than 2 minutes to realize that it's not going well, if we're honest with ourselves. Of course,
Right.
often we're not honest with ourselves and we're stubborn, we don't want to let go, and so we keep trying. But if we're honest with ourselves, we can tell fairly early on whether it's going well or not. And so if we just move on, right? And of course, there's a sunk cost bias there, which that's the psychological bias where if you've already invested in something, then you want to continue investing and you don't want to
Yeah,
let
you
it
don't want to
go.
give it up. You don't want to give it
You don't
up.
want to lose all of that
Yeah.
investment that you put
Right,
into it, right?
right.
So what I say to students is, look, it's perfectly appropriate to spend 2 minutes on a question and then give up on it and move on to the next question. It's not a, you didn't waste those 2 minutes. You you're perfectly within your rights. In fact, it's the right strategy is to spend 2 minutes, if that's how long it takes, to realize that this question is not for me. Now, if you can realize it in 1 minute, all the better.
Even better, yeah.
But don't feel badly for spending 2 minutes on a question just to realize that it's not for you. That's appropriate.
Right, right. No, I agree with you completely.
Um,
People,
and, and and then, to add to what you're saying about checking the timestamps, I've taken the GMAT 5 times, and most of those times, really you could argue all of those times, uh, I had no reason to be anxious because I was just taking it basically as part of my work, but it wasn't in order to get into business school. Although I did eventually go to business school, but that wasn't the reason I took the
right.
GMAT. And nevertheless, I found that every time I checked the timer, even when the timer reflected that I was doing well in terms of
Yeah,
timing, it caused me to read the next question a bit faster than I ought to, right? A GMAT question is not something to be read fast. It's something to be read very slowly and very deliberately with a lot of pauses and a lot of thinking as you're reading it. And even I, who had no reason to be anxious whatsoever, and even though the timer showed me that I was doing well, still, just the act of looking at the timer caused me to rush a little bit more than I should on the next question. So I have a pretty strong opinion about those strategies, and that's based both on my own experience, more importantly, though, based on the experience of the students that I've worked with. It's just a way to distract yourself and to increase your anxiety and to increase your heart rate and to increase the speed of your reading, all of which are negative things to be doing on the GMAT. So that's my answer to that question. Um, did you have something to add, or?
yeah. Avi, I think that's a good point. Is that if you put so much pressure on yourself to have to worry about the time, you're not present again. And I think your observations are clear as you're taking practice tests. Is noticing what you described very well is noticing where you're going off track, or what difficulties I'm having, or what hinders me. So notice that in the practice test. When people take practice tests, they're usually in their own home. You know, they don't feel like, oh my God, the weight of the world is on me to get this score. So they make things easier on themselves. So it's not just about time, it's about the energy they put toward it. So the energy ought to be relaxed, trusting, calm, confident. I got this. If I told you how many times I've said to people that are getting some really high practice test scores, would you please stop studying? Would you quit start studying so much? Quit pushing yourself so hard. This stuff. Now it's to trust it, believe in yourself, and go with confidence. In fact, you and I just worked with someone recently. They bumped 110 points after their 3 sessions in their work with you because they were competent in what they did, and they had the right strategy. And so pulling themselves out of that need to achieve, please others, get a particular score, that just all works against you. So notice for yourself how you distract yourself, defeat yourself, the self-talk, and what's operating, so you can recalibrate on other practice tests or even study this.
So I hope everybody got the message loud and clear. You heard it here first. Both Mike and Avi suggest you do not look at the timer during this test. I want you to think of that timer in the corner of the screen as something that's for other test takers, those other test takers who are not prepared for this test. It's not for you. Okay?
Right.
Did you know there's test takers who show up with a calculator in their bag because they didn't know that a calculator is not allowed in this test. Like I've heard stories of people so unprepared that they show up at the test center and they're surprised to learn they're not allowed to use a calculator. The timer in the corner is for those people, okay? For the people who are just not ready for this test. If you're watching this video, you do not need that timer. And if you think that you need the timer, take some practice tests in which you don't look at the timer and do whatever it takes to not run out of time. And what does it take? Just a reminder, what does it take to not run out of time? Don't be stubborn. Be honest with yourself and let go of questions when you feel they're not going well. That's it. That's the
Right.
whole key.
And it is
And
trusting yourself. You're right. It's trust yourself and be freer and easier along in
that's
the
right.
test.
And just to add one more point, in case there are people watching this who don't know, I have seen people score a 730, which is a score that I think most viewers would be very happy with,
Right.
while getting half the questions wrong. Right? So half right, half wrong.
Wow.
It can lead to a 400, and it can just as easily lead to a 730, depending on what? Depending on the difficulty level of the questions that you got wrong. So if you're getting easy questions wrong, which would happen if you're in a state of panic or you're rushing or you're reading the question too quickly and not noticing a word that makes all the difference, then you'll score closer to 400. But if you're not making careless errors and truly operating at the level of your competency, assuming your competency is at 730, that will be your score, even when you get half the questions wrong. So I'm just emphasizing that point of you got to let go of questions when they're not going well. And just because you let go of a question doesn't mean that you're a failure. It doesn't mean that you won't achieve the score that you were hoping to score. It doesn't mean you won't be able to go to that business school that you were dreaming of. It doesn't mean any of that. But you have to be able to let go of the questions when they feel like they're not going well.
That's extremely reassuring, Avi. That is a great, I bet I would doubt really anyone knows that
Right.
process.
We have a question here from someone who lives 300 kilometers from the test center. For those operating in miles, that's almost 200 miles away. Now, the person says, I see how this trip can be beneficial because it's a new city, positive emotions, little distractions from
Yeah.
test. But of course, it can also go the other way. So I'm just going to read out loud this second message from that person. At this point, it brings additional anxiety and makes this day even more, quote, special. And I think the quotations are meant to mean that
Right.
it's special in
Right.
a negative way for me. How to make the best out of this experience. So what would you say to someone who has to travel that far to the test center?
Well, so it's part of the rehearsal, right? So that one, I would assume you're going to go the day before. You plan to get there in comfortable time. You know where you're going. You Google what the site looks like. You know, you schedule a time for the test that's what your best time. Are you better early, noon, or later? You start to think about how well prepared you are. You focus on strengths. Like when people are start with me, one of the things I actually have them do is besides practice their reframed thoughts to get the new feelings and new beliefs that correspond. I say, I want you to break up your study into 45 to 50-minute segments. Don't think about what you missed or did wrong or problem. Think about the 80, 90% you did well to build the confidence, to build the competence in there. Take a 5-minute break. That allows things to upload. Come back and do another 45, 50-minute segment. But again, if you're getting practice tests in the 700s, that's not your problem. Your problem is something else, which is managing the anxiety, managing the negative thoughts, managing the cortisol, the adrenaline. So rehearse getting there, seeing yourself calm, comfortable, prepared, and make it a good experience. To give you an example, I've taken quite a few tests in my day, right? 8.5 years of college, 3 degrees, 5 licenses. I've taken a lot of tests. To my, I mean, my qualifying exams after 120 course hours is over all your coursework for a PhD. It's 3 days of 8 hours a day of writing questions, of answering questions.
Wow.
And let me tell you how I went into it. Bring it on. I can't wait to show you what I know. I got this. Now, only 50% of people pass the first time on qualifying. And I just thought, I got this. If you can start to adopt that, I know I can do this. I've got what it takes. I'm committed to getting to business school, good application, good preparation. And most of the students I see really have amazing track records and academic records. And you know what else they have? Many are athletes. Many have been well, you're all high achievers. And so you have the skill sets to achieve. It's how do you get more positive with self-esteem? I want to show a difference that many people may not think about or even know. There's a difference between confidence and self-esteem. Confidence is, I can do something. I can pass this test. I can drive a car. I can cook. That's confidence. Self-esteem is, how do I feel about what I do? What's the attribution? Do I validate myself? I remember this young woman that was just came out of her first semester of law school, crying, horrible, terrible semester. She said, I'm a failure. I said, well, how badly did you do? She said, well, I got 4 A minuses. Now, we laugh, but that was for her a failure because it wasn't an A plus, because she's a perfectionist and a high achiever. So she didn't have the self-worth and validating to combine with the confidence.
I want to try to rephrase what you just said about the difference between the two, just to confirm that I understood it correctly.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
way that I would put it is, if you have self-esteem, then when you fail or you feel like you failed at something, your self-esteem doesn't get shaken, whereas your confidence will.
it could, but it could also be an opportunity, right? Like, God, I feel good about what I did in my preparation. What do I need to do to really get these to match?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
again, confidence, competence are enhanced if you have a sense of self-worth. So many people's worth in general, I have to tell you, comes from the outside in. Oh, you did well, you achieved grades, praise. Inside out self-worth is much more powerful.
And also will make you feel less stressed at the test center
Less
because
stress by test center, by
you're not
application
thinking the
process.
score that I get is a label that will inform me of my self-worth.
Yeah, or yeah, how smart I am.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you have to really connect that to self-talk. Like, I'm not a good test taker. Well, how do you reframe that? Well, hey, I have a great tutor. I'm prepared well. I'm learning. And you know what? I am good at math. I realize that, you know, this
It's
is a
also
strength.
possible to say I wasn't good at math, but now I am. Right? I think a lot of people kind of think, well, if I wasn't good at math in school, well, then I'm not good at math. But that's not something that's static, right? I mean, and it's funny because there's nothing else in life, I think, where people have this static mindset, right? I don't know how to ice skate, but I could learn,
Right.
right? I don't know how to um, I don't know how to jump that high, but I could practice. But
Right.
when it comes to math, for some reason, people just think, oh, I'm just not good at math.
They have a
Yeah.
block and they just shut down.
Yeah. I would just add for the person who's traveling really far to the test center, if possible, use that travel time to clear your mind, either with a playlist of mindfulness related things, whether that's music or a guided meditation or something like that. And I would also say, this goes for everyone, not just those traveling far. I've found that it's useful to have some kind of playlist, whichever type of playlist helps you feel calm, uh, and use the same playlist before every single practice test. And then, of course, use it again before your actual test, because that can make it feel like no big deal, the actual test, right? Because it just feels more like all those other tests that you've taken, even though those were practice and this one is real. But the more you can kind of make those experiences match one another, it kind of makes the actual test feel a little bit less unique, less different, less of a big deal.
No, that is an excellent point. It reminds me of another directive I try to bring to everyone, which is this: before study, before practice test or actual GMAT, you put yourself in the zone with the exact same sequence, whether of those 6 techniques, you can do any order, but always do it the same way. So it puts you, clear. In fact, let me do that one technique with you now to show you. It takes a minute. It's easy, and just it'll give you an idea of like a thing to do to start study. So here's what I ask people to do. In fact, let's have them do it. I mean, if you're listening or watching, right? Close your eyes for a moment. Just close your eyes, listen to my voice. This is called the magic eraser. It has 2 elements. 1, you can't stop thoughts. Let them pass through. Don't judge them. Don't hold on to them. Feature 2, imagine a whiteboard in your mind. It may have writing, words, formulas, colors, symbols, pictures. You have a magic eraser. Erase that board quickly, easily, and effortlessly, like a windshield wiper clearing your windshield. A clear board is a clear mind. A clear mind is an open mind. An open mind is a relaxed mind. So picture the board in your mind's eye. Attach a feeling to it. When you have it, go ahead and open your eyes. What feeling did you bring back, Avi?
Not a care in the world.
That's the point of that. So imagine doing that before each question or at the break or before you start studying. You release everything, mind is clear, and that makes you more available to the read, comprehend, and take you away from worry.
I love that. I like to tell people to try to take a deep breath at the start of each question, because physiologically doing that, I feel like, makes everything that happened up until now just part of the past, like no longer of any relevance. It's kind of like a restart, like restarting your computer, right? And then there's
Yeah,
a new question in front of
reboot.
you, and that's all that
Yeah,
exists. Everything that's
yeah,
in the past is in the past. And a lot of times what people say to me is, what are you talking about deep breath after each question? I don't have time for that. The timer is ticking. To which my response is always, look, even if it takes a minute out of however many minutes that section offers you, it's a minute well spent. It's going to get you a higher score than not spending that minute. Of course, I'm talking cumulatively,
yeah,
1 minute on those deep breaths. And if you can close your eyes when you take that deep breath, even better, because otherwise you're tempted to start reading the next question. And
yeah,
you're probably going to read it too fast. No, close your eyes, take a second, take 2 seconds, take a deep breath. Now you're fresh for this new question.
yeah, exactly.
And it's also a good opportunity to remind yourself when you're taking that deep breath, I don't have to answer every single question that I see. I get to choose. If the
Yeah,
question feels like it's not going well, I don't have to answer it.
right.
I'm the boss, not the GMAT. And the GMAT is trying to be the boss. It's picking questions for me, but I'm in control. I get to choose which ones I actually attempt to solve and which ones I throw away. And as long as it's my choice, then I'm in control. I'm the one who has all the power in this relationship. And I feel like that can be very powerful for people.
And that enhances performance.
Absolutely. And then you don't have to worry about the timer because
Yeah,
you're not
right.
trying every single question.
You don't have to try, and you're not trying to get a great score. You're trying to do your best. You're trying to be present, trying to clear away obstacles. And by, you know what, one of the most gratifying things I hear people send back to me, I think I sent you a copy of some of the testimonials, like 6 pages. And what really is most gratifying to me, well, that they do well, one, but two, they say, you know, these things I've learned here doing this GMAT process and training and tutoring and the performance anxiety is, I can apply it to my whole life. It's all applicable to any other elements.
Absolutely, 100%. I can imagine someone sitting in a boardroom meeting years after getting their MBA
Yeah,
and getting lost in thought, losing
yeah,
focus
yeah.
in the meeting, and then recalling one of Mike's techniques to maybe close eyes and use that magic eraser on your brain. Right? I love that. I have a slightly different variation of that I tell students to do, which is don't try to fight the thought that's coming into your head because you'll always lose. Like
Yeah,
you can't reject it. But what I say to students is make a mental note that you'll come back to that thought later, as soon as the test is over. So, as an example, all of a sudden I'm thinking, hey, I think that previous question was easier than it ought to be at this stage of the test, right? So then I say to myself, oh, okay, yeah, that's a really good thought. I'll definitely give it some more time and some more oxygen. I want to finish that thought completely. I'm just going to make a mental note, like almost like a bookmark. I'll come back to it after the test is over because that allows me to much more easily remove it from my brain because I'm not fighting it. On the contrary, I'm accepting it. Yep, great thought. I'm going to give it all of the time that it deserves, just not right now, later. And that
right,
allows me to kind of move on
right.
and regain my focus on the question in front of me.
You know, Avi, I hope all of your students and people listening and watching understand how reassuring you are with what you're saying psychologically. It's calming, it's reassuring, it's positive, it's optimistic. And those are really great qualities that if you take with you into the GMAT, you're going to do better. I've seen a musician right now he's a junior in one of the top music schools in the country, and he was over practicing. He's afraid of auditions. He didn't even enjoy playing, and I have to tell you, I probably shocked him more than he ever expected. I said, you know, if you can't learn to enjoy playing concerts and music and your cello and performing auditions and showing off, you probably ought to not be a musician. And about 6 weeks later, he said he had some recitals and performances and said, wow. He said, you know what? I've really come to peace with this and I've started to really enjoy. And then he brought up his real problem. He says, I have social anxiety. He was hiding in the practice room. He was over practicing. He
Right.
was hard. He was negative and hard on himself, all defeating and contributing to his not enjoying his instrument and the beauty of what he can do. So I think it's the same for GMAT. It's like
100%.
it's you know, engage in a way that makes it fun or interesting and challenging, but take away from it strengths, not weaknesses, fears, criticism.
I have a very important question here in the chat from someone who has observed that the moment he has to read a question twice,
Yeah.
he starts worrying of losing time and the performance spirals downwards. And I would love to hear what you think about that, Mike. But before you do, I just want to share with all the viewers, and this will probably be shocking for many of you,
All right.
but that first time that I took the GMAT, the first question came up on the screen. It was a quant question, and those who know me know that quant is my jam. It's what I
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was very excited to see these brand
Yeah.
new quant
Yay.
questions that I've never seen before. Like, I was in a great
Yeah.
mood.
Yeah.
And the first question pops up. I actually hadn't taken any practice tests before that, and that was probably my mistake. But then I saw that timer. At the time, it was 75 minutes per section. This was many, many years ago. And I can't stop looking at the timer, and it changes literally after 1 second. It changed from
Yeah.
7500 to 7459, and not 1 second goes by, and it changes again to 7458. And I just stared at that timer probably for 10 seconds, and then I knocked myself out of it and looked at the
Yeah.
question in front of me, and I read the first sentence of that question, and I realized when I got to the period that even though I technically read it, I didn't really read it, meaning I wasn't able to comprehend or to digest the words that I read. So I read it a second time, and a third, and a fourth, and a fifth, and a sixth, and every time I read it, I felt that my heart rate went a little bit higher, and a little bit higher, and a little bit higher, and I started sweating, even though I was feeling
Wow.
really
Wow.
cold. So
Yeah.
I'm feeling really cold in this cold test room with the air conditioning blasting, and I'm sweating, and my heart rate is going crazy. And
Yeah.
this is my first time ever experiencing any kind of test anxiety, or really any
Yeah.
anxiety of any
Yeah.
kind. And I didn't really know at first what it was. So what's happening to me? I thought maybe I was experiencing a heart attack or something like that.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
remember thinking, that doesn't make sense. I'm too young to have a heart
Yeah.
attack, right? And this is literally the thoughts that were going through my mind. And then I thought, well, I can't take the test like this. And there's no point. So I guess I should just go home.
Yeah.
I was just about to raise my hand to get
Yeah.
the proctor to come excuse me from the test center. And just as my hand started going up, I thought, well, wait a minute. I have nothing to lose. I mean, I already paid the 250 US dollars it was at the time
Yeah.
to take this test. So why don't I try something crazy? And here's what I did. I leaned back in the chair, I took my glasses off, and I closed my eyes, and I just tried to take breaths that were as deep as I possibly could.
Yeah.
And I decided that I'm not going to open my eyes until I feel completely calm, so much so that I could fall asleep any minute.
Wow.
And I did this for what felt like a half hour. I'm
Wow.
not exaggerating. It felt like a half an hour, and I knew that it was a total of 75 minutes for the section, but I really had nothing to lose at that point. And I remember thinking just before I opened my eyes, I remember trying to predict what the timer will show because I didn't want to panic when I see the timer again. And I remember thinking, well, 75 minutes minus 30, I probably have something like 45 minutes left.
Yeah.
I open my eyes and I look at the timer, and I still have 72 minutes and change remaining, which means that what felt like half an hour really was more like 2.5 minutes, right?
Wow.
And I got a 750 that day, right?
Wow.
So I tell that story to all my students because, you know, if you find yourself reading a sentence more than once, and this goes to the person who wrote the question in the chat, if you ever find yourself needing to reread a sentence on the GMAT, you're not in the right headspace for this test, but there's something you can do about it. You can get into the right
You
head.
can get in the right
You can do
headspace
it.
with some tools and recalibrating.
Exactly. And even if it takes a minute, even if it takes 2 minutes, it is time well spent. So stop what you're doing because you're not in the right headspace. You shouldn't have to ever read a sentence a second time. And you know what? You know that you shouldn't have to read a sentence a second time because that's why it's causing you to spiral out of control and increase your anxiety because you know that you shouldn't have to read a sentence a second time. So stop what you're doing. And then my recommendation would just be close your eyes, lean back, take a couple deep breaths, and try again. Mike, what's your reaction to this?
Well, I think that was brilliant what you said. I mean, get the magic eraser out, erase the thought like, this is bad, I've had to read it twice. No, clear it, maybe a breath or two. And, that's a calming diaphragmatic breath. And then try it again and say, okay, I'm going to really pay attention. You yourself talk to takes you to the moment and not into something else. Like you reclaimed your power, your sense of authority, and you took control, Avi. And really, if you think about performance and anxiety, it's controlling your thoughts, controlling your emotions, and doing what you need to do so that you're creating the space you need to be in to achieve. And the more relaxed you are, the better you'll achieve. It will flow, things will flow through you and to you from all the work training. If you're tense, tight, uptight, it'd be like a batter in the batter's box. I'm going to hit this ball. And you think, there's no way you'll ever hit the ball. You see, they warm up, they're relaxed, their mind, so they're totally relaxed. So if you're tense and rereading, the thought is, oh, calm down, relax, focus, clear my mind, so that it's a redux, right? Redo, put yourself in the moment.
And I also think it's important before you go in there to anticipate it, to say, look, it's very likely that at some point during the test, maybe on the first question, maybe later, I'm going to find myself rereading a sentence. It's very likely that it will happen. It's not a bad thing. It's very predictable. And when it happens, here's what I'm going to do. And then you do it. And then everything is going according to plan. So there's no reason to panic, which reminds me of a story of Michael Phelps, the Olympic swimmer, who had a plan of what to do in case he has a goggles malfunction, or you dive into the water and what if the goggles move?
Mhm.
So his eyes, and then it happened. And what was his plan? He was like, well, I'm a world-class swimmer. I can swim with my eyes closed in a straight line. And I also know exactly how many of these I have to do to finish one length of the pool. So if that happens, then I'll just make sure that I'm swimming in a straight line because I know how to do that without looking. And I'm going to count these, right? And basically I'll do it without seeing what I'm doing. And sure enough, it happened, and he did everything according to his plan, and he broke the world record in that particular swim. So I think it's really important to kind of think ahead of time, okay, what could go wrong and what am I going to do about it, so that when it does go wrong, you don't panic, you have a plan for it. And I think another great thing to predict or to anticipate is that the very first question of your test is too hard for you. Right? There's a good chance that will happen.
That's right. And they prepare for it. They have the tools, the techniques to recover, and the plan. And that's pretty much what we're talking about.
I can't tell you, Mike, how many students I've had who came back from a test and said, the first question was too hard for me. And it all went downhill from there because they, kind of psychologically you feel like first impressions, I guess, from real life, right? The first question is the most important. Of course, so to be clear, it is not. And it's not more important than any other question. Well, technically, the importance of the question is dependent on the difficulty level of that question, right? The easier it is, the more important it is, the harder it is, the less important it is. If the first question is hard, it's not important. Move on. Don't worry about it and don't panic.
Let it go. You have to let it go.
I know that your time is limited here, Mike. So one final question, if I may. I've had a lot of students who, for whatever reason, believed that in the final week before the test, that's when they really need to ramp up their studies. In fact, a lot of people take a week off of work the week before the test so they can really hit the ground running in terms of their studying. They're planning to study 13 hours a day, maybe take a practice test every single day in that last week.
Avi, that is so true. It's the last thing you should do. It's like a swimmer you're talking about, Phil. They taper the week before. They don't press on and go higher. You pull back, you go have fun. The last person I worked with was, I have to study, I have to prepare, but my family's coming in for Thanksgiving, and I'm not going to go see the soccer World Cup I said, no, you're going to the World Cup. You're going to be with your cousin. You're going to have fun. He said, man, it was great. And I got my study done. I said, I need to take an hour or two. So you're totally correct. Ramp down, trust yourself, let it go.
And I'll just add on that note, a lot of people overstudy and they don't realize that they're overstudying. Well, let me
Yeah.
just say this. If you're having nightmares in the middle of the night, waking up in a cold sweat about the GMAT, you're overstudying. And I'll
Yeah.
let you, Mike, have the final word there. And like, how can people know that they need to study less rather than more?
Yeah. If you're having palpitations, negative thinking, if you're anxious, you're irritable, you're avoiding people, life experiences, you're off track. You're not balanced, you're off track. Get your life on track and balance. Don't deprive yourself. Feed yourself positivity, friends, thought. And like you said, that was brilliant. You have to ramp down, taper so that you're rested, feeling good and ready.
So if someone says I'm going to cancel my gym membership until after my GMAT, because who has time to work out
No,
when I
go
have to
work
study?
out more, study less.
Good.
All right, Javi. Thank
Thank you
you.
so much, Mike. I really appreciate your
I
time,
really, it was
and we'll be in
great
touch.
being here. Great being here. People are lucky to have you, Javi, as a tutor.
And you, Mike.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Bye.
Thank you to the viewers. Thanks for being with us.